You're listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Garland Nixon, with my co-host, Dr. Wilmer Leon.
Thank you, Garland.
Russian diplomats are making it clear that they support China in this Taiwan crisis. Also, Russia is no longer in the, quote, age of cooperation with the West. Joining us to discuss this and more, we have Dr. Gerald Horne. He's a professor of history at the University of Houston in Texas. He's an author, a historian, and a researcher. Dr. Horne, welcome back to the Critical Hour.
Thank you for inviting me.
In TASS's article today, we see a story that says, quote, Russia has no grounds to refuse to help China in case of an armed conflict in Taiwan. Vladimir Zhabarov, first deputy chairman of the International Committee of Russia's Federation Council, or Upper Parliament House, said. Your thoughts, Dr. Horne?
Well, I think we should all be on pins and needles, and I mean that quite seriously. I say that for a number of reasons. Number one, what we're going through now bears an eerie resemblance, I'm afraid to say, to what erupted in the Balkans circa August 1914, when the fuse was lit that led to World War I. Now, it appeared that it was just a local crisis, that it's a crisis involving the Austro-Hungarian Empire and perhaps the Serbs. But quickly, it spread around the world. And as you know, many black Americans, in particular, the Harlem Hellfighters, fought and lost their lives as a result of this conflict. And it may not be accidental that that happened in August, because in August, I think that there is oftentimes a perception in the imperialist countries that people are asleep, people are on a vacation, that they can sneak a fastball on the outside corner. And that oftentimes proves to be disastrous, as it did in August 1914. And then we know that U.S. imperialism is undergoing a bout of what the Yale historian Paul Kennedy called in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, imperial overstretch. That is to say, in his study of previous empires before the rise of the U.S. empire, it seemed that they inevitably become overextended because they have their fingers in so many different pies. And certainly that's the case for U.S. imperialism, which is now funding the Ukrainian war, that is to say, the war against Russia that's now unfolding, that now has dispatched Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, which has outraged and inflamed the People's Republic of China. It could lead to disastrous consequences. You probably already know that for the first time in more than a decade, Chinese purchases, the People's Bank of China purchases of U.S. Treasury bills, which are basically loans to the United States government for everything from the Pentagon to the post office, have fallen below $1 trillion. I expect China to buy less agricultural commodities from the United States Farm Belt. Keep in mind as well that Taiwan is heavily dependent on the Chinese economy to stay afloat. And in the next day or two, there will be these military exercises surrounding Taiwan, which could easily head south. And as we speak, there are military exercises around Indonesia involving Japan, Australia, and the United States, clearly aimed at China. Recall that it was in 1965 that you had this bloody coup in Indonesia, the largest, by some measures, predominantly a Muslim country on planet Earth, that led to pogrom against the Chinese population of Indonesia, which basically controls the economy. I dare say that if that were to happen again as a result of a miscalculation, it would be Katie bar the door. And so I would urge the hotheads in Washington to cool down, that they're involved in a classical overstretch, not only with regard to Ukraine and Asia, but keep in mind the latest news from Vienna is that the talks on nuclear issues with Iran are resuming. Robert Malley, the chief U.S. negotiator, is jetting to Austria as we speak. I hope and I trust that's an indication that the United States would not like to fight a three-front war, despite Mr. Biden's recent trip to Israel and Saudi Arabia, where clearly on the table was conflict with Iran. I hope that this jetting to Vienna, Mr. Malley, represents some sort of ratcheting down of tensions. But I think, and I fear to say, that U.S. imperialism may feel that time is running out, that they cannot compete with China economically or financially. China's in the process of outstripping the United States in terms of producing computer chips, which, of course, are a major export from Taiwan. And if China puts a blockade on Taiwan, it would severely hamper the United States' ability to use computer chips for automobiles. In fact, we just received reports that a number of auto plants in Michigan have shut down because of a dearth of computer chips. And so this situation that we're facing globally is rapidly spinning out of control. And I trust and I hope that we will not have to relive the title of a now celebrated book, The Guns of August.
What do you make of the language by Vladimir Zabarov? He says, in principle, there is nothing impossible. We understand that sometimes it is a game of chance and a conflict may grow into a big war. But I think that China is behaving very cautiously in this sense, in a very restrained manner, but continues to build up its defense potential. And then he goes on to say that basically after Pelosi leaving Taiwan and that China and Russia are moving closer together, he says, because it will be difficult for China to confront the United States without Russia's support. Your thoughts, because to me, that's very clear, very direct, and not so much diplomatic as it is just direct and to the point.
Well, I agree with your analysis. However, my reading tells me that of 19 tabletop exercises involving a Chinese conflict with U.S. forces, China has triumphed 19 consecutive times. So I think that our Russian friend may be underestimating the prowess of the Chinese military. And I hope that all sides, particularly the U.S. side, is taking into account that a lot of the pressure that's coming for China to respond is coming from below. It's not as if the Chinese Communist Party is leading the masses around by the nose. That is to say, it's deeply felt in China, this idea of a century of humiliation. That is to say, from the 1840s to the triumph of the Chinese Revolution in 1949, when the European powers, led by Britain in the first instance, but also including the United States, walked all over China, used it basically as a doormat. And there is a thirst, not necessarily for revenge, but some sort of acknowledgement of that century of humiliation, and certainly not the igniting of a new century of humiliation, which brings us to Speaker Pelosi, a veteran politician. However, I do not think you can understand her misadventure without looking at her congressional district, which covers most of San Francisco, one of the largest Asian American populations in a congressional district, over 30%, mostly Chinese American. And like the Cuban American population in South Florida, or the Venezuelan or Nicaraguan American population in Florida as a whole, the Chinese American population basically are refugees from revolutionary unrest, in this case in Asia, and they are the ones who are driving Nancy Pelosi into this cul-de-sac, which she recently entered. And I would be remiss if I failed to mention Congressman Gregory Meeks of Southeast Queens, a black American who leads the House on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I hope you saw the footage of he and Nancy Pelosi leaving the plane yesterday. I thought that Gregory Meeks was Marcel Marceau, that he was some sort of mime. If Nancy Pelosi would step to the left, he would step to the left. Nancy Pelosi would turn and wave, he would turn and wave. I was trying to say, is it because he doesn't want to be mistaken for her security and be asked to move away from her? Or is it because he's just a robot, letting Nancy Pelosi lead him around by the nose and basically selling out the interests of its predominantly black district in southeast Queens, New York.
Here's another article in RT. Cooperation with the West is over. Russia's decades-long attempt to integrate with the West is not only over, but even cooperation is now off the cards, a senior strategist in Moscow has warned. Dr. Horne, your thoughts?
Well, this may be a turning point in world history. I think that it is clear that the North Atlantic countries have miscalculated. The Germans in particular, the fourth largest economy on planet Earth, the second largest, most populous nation in Europe, faces the grim prospect of having their citizenry freeze in the dark within a few months. We already hear stories from Hanover, Germany, about people being asked to take showers together or to take cold showers. This is only the beginning of a precipitous decline. And then the Green Foreign Minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, basically had the audacity to announce that Germany would stand by Taiwan if Taiwan had a confrontation with China. Now, you talk about selling whoop tickets. I mean, Germany can hardly send weapons to neighboring Ukraine. So how are they going to intervene thousands of miles away in Taiwan? She is clearly out over her skis. I'd like to have something of what she's been smoking.
What about this discussion now that cooperation with the West is over and Moscow only needs, quote unquote, transactional deals with Western states? That to me shows a real dramatic shift in mindset on the Russian side of the equation.
It certainly is, and it's congruent with what I said a moment or two or so about Germany. That is to say, that you saw the ditching of the deal on the International Space Station between Russia and the United States of America. I dare say that this is only the beginning of tensions being ratcheted up between the largest nuclear powers, speaking of Russia, and the number two nation, speaking of Germany. You saw the meeting at the United Nations the other day with Secretary General Antonio Guterres warning humanity that we're just a banana peel away from slipping into some sort of nuclear holocaust that could spell the doom of humanity. Let us hope that he is proven wrong.
But lastly, there's an article, U.S. wants to demonstrate its impunity through its actions in Taiwan. So the Russians are basically saying, hey, look, they want to show that they can do anything they want, anywhere they want. And if you read what the Chinese are saying, they're saying we're going to take actions and declare the time where the U.S. basically controls the world. We're going to declare that over. So there's a discussion about U.S. hegemony coming to an end. Dr. Horne.
Well, I think that that's a fair prognostication. And let me reference what I said a moment or two ago about the Chinese possibly curtailing, as they promised to do, purchases of U.S. agricultural commodities. They can buy soybeans from Brazil as opposed to Illinois. Let us also reference the curtailing of People's Bank of China buying treasury bills from the U.S. Treasury. And let me also warn the Pentagon about the growth of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, led by China and Russia, also including Iran. Already, it's more than a match for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is already overmatched in Ukraine. And I would warn, once again, these hotheads to not overestimate their declining strength.
Thank you very much. We've been talking with Dr. Gerald Horne. He's a professor of history at the University of Houston in Texas. He's an author, historian, and researcher, author of many books. You can find them online anywhere books are sold. You're listening to The Critical Hour on radio.